The massive alien warships filled the dark space around Earth like hungry wolves surrounding a wounded deer. Their metal hulls gleamed under the distant sun as they pointed their weapons at the small blue planet below. Admiral Vex Thalorian stood on the bridge of his flagship called the Eternal Dominion and watched the human ships surrender one after another. His blue-scaled skin showed patches of satisfaction as he saw the white flags appearing on human vessels across the solar system. The war had lasted 3 long years, and now it was finally over. The Galactic Confederation had won against the upstart human race, just as everyone had predicted. Thalorian's golden eyes tracked the movement of the last few human military ships as they powered down their weapons and shields. Soon there would be no more resistance from this primitive species that had dared to challenge the might of 6 ancient civilizations working together. Captain Ryan Mitchell sat in his command chair aboard the UES Liberty and stared at the surrender order that had just arrived from Earth High Command. The message was short and painful to read, but he understood why it had to be done. Earth's orbital defense platforms were destroyed, and most of their fleet was either captured or floating in pieces among the stars. There was nothing left to fight with except pride, and that would not stop the alien weapons from turning their homeworld into burning rock. Mitchell read the message aloud to his bridge crew who had served with him for 5 years of exploration and now 3 years of desperate war. The order was simple, but it felt like swallowing poison. They were to send their best diplomat to the Confederation flagship to sign the surrender documents that would end human independence forever. Ambassador Kate Harrison was already on board the Liberty, after being evacuated from the diplomatic station near Mars. Before the aliens could capture her, Harrison was 52 years old with silver streaks running through her brown hair and sharp, blue eyes that had seen too many negotiations fail over the years. She had spent most of her adult life talking to alien species and learning their languages and customs. Now she would have to use all that knowledge to make sure humanity's surrender was not also their complete destruction. She knew the aliens could demand anything they wanted, and Earth would have no choice but to agree. Lieutenant Ben Carter knocked on her door and entered when she called for him to come in. Carter was 28 years old and had been working as her aide for 2 years before the war started. He was nervous and kept checking his datapad every few seconds as if the information might change if he looked at it enough times. His hands shook slightly as he handed her the preliminary surrender documents that had been transmitted from the alien flagship. Harrison took the documents and began reading through them carefully while Carter paced back and forth in the small cabin. The terms were exactly as harsh as she had expected them to be. Humanity would give up all their space colonies and military ships. They would have to pay tribute to the Confederation for the next 100 years. Their population would be limited and monitored. Worst of all, they would become a protectorate species with no right to govern themselves. Carter stopped pacing and looked at her with worried eyes. He had seen her negotiate with difficult alien species before, but never under circumstances like these. The humans had lost everything, and now they were completely at the mercy of their enemies. There would be no second chances or opportunities to find a better deal later. The shuttle bay announcement came over the ship's communication system 15 minutes later. Harrison gathered her papers and straightened her diplomatic uniform, while Carter collected his recording equipment and translation devices. They walked through the corridors of the Liberty, knowing that this might be the last time they saw a human ship that was still under human control. The Tier shuttle that would take them to the alien flagship was small and cramped with barely enough room for 2 passengers and a pilot. Harrison strapped herself into the uncomfortable seat and watched through the small window as they flew away from the Liberty and toward the massive Confederation warship. The Eternal Dominion was 10 times larger than any human vessel and covered with weapons that could destroy entire cities. With a single shot, Carter tried to make conversation during the short flight, but Harrison was focused on reviewing the legal documents one more time. She had studied galactic law for 20 years and knew there might be something hidden in the complex regulations that could help humanity even in defeat. The problem was that the Confederation had written most of those laws to favor the established civilizations and make it almost impossible for newer species to challenge their authority. The docking bay of the alien ship was enormous and filled with strange machinery that hummed with power. Tall Zephyrian guards waited for them as the shuttle landed with their characteristic blue scales and fierce golden eyes that seemed to look right through human flesh. Each guard carried energy weapons that could kill a person instantly, and wore armor that made them look even more intimidating than they already were. Admiral Thalorian approached them as they stepped out of the shuttle, followed by representatives from 6 different alien species. His translator device made crackling sounds as it converted his words into English, but the meaning was clear enough. He told Harrison that she was there to formalize her species' defeat, and that the terms were not open for discussion or changes. Harrison looked around at the assembled aliens and saw the confidence in their faces. They believed they had already won everything, and that this ceremony was just a formality to make their victory official. She nodded politely and told them she understood her role, but asked if they could proceed according to proper diplomatic protocols. After all, she said, the Confederation prided itself on following the law and doing things the correct way. Thalorian agreed, though his scales darkened with impatience. He wanted to get this over with quickly so his fleet could move on to other duties. The ceremonial chamber was prepared, and the holographic reporters from across the galaxy were already waiting to document what they thought would be humanity's final political act. Harrison followed the guards through the corridors of the ship while Carter stayed close behind her, taking notes on everything he saw. The chamber was large and impressive, with a crystalline table in the center where the surrender documents waited to be signed. Harrison sat down across from the Confederation Council and looked at each alien representative in turn. She knew this was probably humanity's last chance to avoid complete enslavement, but she also knew that sometimes the most important battles were fought with words instead of weapons. The ceremonial chamber aboard the Eternal Dominion buzzed with activity as reporters from dozens of different worlds positioned their recording equipment around the crystalline table. Harrison could see the excitement in their alien faces as they prepared to document what everyone believed would be the final surrender of the human race. The air smelled of ozone and metal, while strange lights flickered. Across the curved walls of the massive ship, Admiral Thalorian took his place at the head of the table with the other Confederation Council members arranging themselves on either side of him. Chancellor Crix of the Hive Consortium clicked his mandibles together in what passed for satisfaction among his insect-like species. General Voss of the Corellian Alliance stood perfectly still like a living crystal statue, while his faceted eyes reflected the light in rainbow patterns. Each alien representative wore the formal robes of their office and carried themselves with the confidence of certain victory. Harrison sat down in the chair that had been provided for her and placed her hands flat on the smooth surface of the table. The surrender documents were spread out before her in neat rows with translation devices positioned at regular intervals so she could read them in English. Carter took a seat beside her and activated his recording equipment while trying to look calm despite the nervous energy that made his hands shake slightly. The terms written in the documents were even worse than Harrison had feared when she first reviewed them on the shuttle. Humanity would surrender every space-based facility they had built over the past century, including mining stations and research outposts. All human military vessels would be transferred to Confederation control, and their crews would be relocated to work camps on distant worlds. Earth itself would become a protectorate with alien governors, controlling every aspect of human society from population growth to resource allocation. Thalorian gestured toward the documents with one of his forearms while his translator crackled with static. He told Harrison that these terms would ensure her species learned their proper place in the galactic order, and that signing them was the only way humanity could continue to exist under Confederation protection. His golden eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he watched her read through each page of restrictions and requirements. Harrison took her time examining every clause and subsection, while the alien representatives waited with growing impatience. She could feel their confidence radiating across the table, as they assumed she was simply delaying the inevitable. Carter made detailed notes about each document while occasionally glancing up at the assembled aliens with barely concealed nervousness. Chancellor Crix tapped his mandibles together in the clicking pattern that indicated amusement among his people. He commented that humans seemed to enjoy wasting time with unnecessary delays when everyone already knew what the outcome would be. General Voss remained silent, but his crystal form flickered with patterns that suggested he shared the Chancellor's impatience after reading through all the documents. Twice Harrison set down her datapad and looked directly at Admiral Thalorian. She told him that before she signed anything, she would like to invoke standard diplomatic protocol for formal surrender documents. Her voice was calm and professional despite the magnitude of what was happening around her. The assembled aliens exchanged glances of surprise and confusion. They had expected the human diplomat to simply sign the papers and end this ceremony as quickly as possible. Instead, she was asking for additional procedures that would only prolong what should have been a simple formality. Thalorian's scales shifted to a darker shade of blue as his patience began to wear thin. He asked her what possible purpose could be served by invoking additional protocols when the war was already over, and the terms were clearly stated. His 3 fellow officers nodded in agreement while the reporters adjusted their equipment to capture every word of the exchange. Harrison maintained her diplomatic composure and explained that she simply wanted to ensure they were following proper procedures for such an important document. After all, she said, the Confederation had built its reputation on lawful governance and adherence to established regulations. Surely they would want to make certain that everything was done correctly, according to their own legal standards. The logic of her argument was difficult to dispute, even though it was clearly an attempt to slow down the proceedings. Thalorian consulted briefly with his legal advisors before grudgingly agreeing to hear what protocol she wished to invoke. He warned her that this would not change the fundamental terms of surrender or provide any escape from the consequences of humanity's defeat. Harrison nodded graciously and told him she understood that the terms themselves were not negotiable. However, she referenced a specific provision in the Galactic Diplomatic Code that required all formal surrender documents to be reviewed against the complete legal framework under which the original conflict had been initiated. She cited Section 47, subsection 12 with the precision of someone who had memorized the regulation, word for word. A murmur of surprise ran through the chamber as the alien representatives realized she was invoking an extremely obscure provision that most diplomats had forgotten existed. General Voss leaned forward and commented that no one had used that particular regulation in over 2 centuries. His crystal face reflected confused patterns of light as he tried to understand why a defeated enemy would want to complicate their own surrender. Harrison agreed that the provision was rarely used but pointed out that it remained valid law under the current Confederation legal code. She asked politely whether the Council wished to proceed illegally by ignoring established regulations or if they preferred to follow their own laws, even when it was inconvenient. The question put the alien leaders in an impossible position. They could not admit to ignoring their own legal requirements without undermining their authority and reputation across the galaxy. At the same time, they were suspicious of any delay tactic that might give humanity some unexpected advantage. Carter activated his portable data unit and began searching through the legal databases while Harrison waited patiently for the Council's decision. The silence stretched for several uncomfortable minutes as the aliens debated among themselves in hushed tones. Finally, Thalorian announced that they would review the legal framework as requested, even though it would not change the outcome of the proceedings. Harrison thanked him for his commitment to proper procedure and asked Carter to retrieve the relevant documents from their archives. The young aide's fingers moved quickly across his controls as he accessed the vast collection of laws and regulations that governed interstellar relations. Soon the air above the table filled with holographic displays showing hundreds of legal codes and precedents. The alien representatives watched with growing unease as the complexity of galactic law spread out before them in glowing text and diagrams that seemed to go on forever. The tension in the ceremonial chamber grew thicker as Harrison's simple request sent waves of uncertainty through the assembled Confederation leadership. Admiral Thalorian conferred quietly with his legal advisors, while the holographic displays cast strange shadows across his blue-scaled features. The other council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as they began to realize that this surrender ceremony might not be as straightforward as they had expected. Chancellor Crix's mandibles clicked nervously as he watched the legal documents floating in the air above the table. His compound eyes darted back and forth between the various codes and regulations, while his insect brain tried to process the implications of what the human diplomat was doing. General Voss remained perfectly still, but the crystal patterns in his body flickered with increasing frequency as his confusion grew. Harrison sat patiently, with her hands folded while Carter continued to organize. the legal displays according to her whispered instructions. The young aide had worked with her long enough to understand her methods, and he knew she never invoked obscure regulations without having a very good reason. His nervous energy had transformed into focused concentration as he helped her prepare whatever trap she was setting for their captors. After several minutes of hushed consultation, Admiral Thalorian finally announced that the Council would review the complete legal framework as requested. His voice carried a note of irritation as he emphasized that this procedural exercise would not change the fundamental reality of humanity's defeat. The war was over and Earth had lost regardless of what ancient laws might say about proper documentation. Harrison nodded graciously and thanked him for his commitment to following established procedures. She told Carter to begin with the original legal justification for the conflict, while the alien representatives watched with growing suspicion. The holographic display shifted to show a specific section of the galactic peace, accords that glowed brighter than the surrounding text. The Confederation had initiated their war against humanity under Article 15 of the Peace Accords, which dealt with territorial expansion limits for developing civilizations. Harrison read the relevant passage aloud in her clear diplomatic voice while the aliens nodded in agreement. The law stated that newer species were restricted in how quickly they could expand beyond their home systems to prevent them from disrupting established trade routes and territorial boundaries. Chancellor Crix interrupted to confirm that humanity had indeed violated these expansion limits by establishing colonies in 17 different star systems within a 10-year period. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction as he recited the evidence that had been used to justify military action against Earth. The humans had clearly exceeded the permitted growth rate and deserved to face the consequences of their aggressive behavior. Harrison agreed completely that humanity had exceeded the expansion limits, which surprised everyone in the chamber, including her own aide. Carter looked at her with confusion written across his young face while the alien representatives exchanged glances of triumph. If the human diplomat was admitting guilt, then this legal review was nothing more than an elaborate waste of time. But Harrison was not finished speaking, and her next words sent a chill through the assembled council members. She asked Carter to display Amendment 7 Alpha of the same peace accords which had been ratified by the Confederation just 15 years earlier. The holographic text showed a provision that most of the aliens had completely forgotten about in the excitement of planning their war against the upstart human species. General Voss read the amendment aloud in his crystalline voice that rang like wind chimes in the chamber. The law stated that any species achieving faster than light communication capabilities could petition for reclassification from developing to established status. Once reclassified, they would be subject to different regulations that allowed unlimited expansion within unclaimed territories. Admiral Thalorian's scales shifted to an even darker shade of blue as the implications began to sink in. He demanded to know what Harrison was suggesting with this obscure legal citation. His golden eyes narrowed as he studied her calm expression and realized that she might not be as defeated as he had assumed. Harrison's smile was polite but unmistakably confident as she delivered her bombshell announcement. Humanity had achieved quantum entanglement communication technology 8 months before the war began, which qualified them for reclassification under the amendment General Voss had just read. More importantly, they had filed the proper petition with the Confederation Diplomatic Corps, according to established procedures. Carter pulled up another document from their archives and projected it for everyone to see. Form 2847Q had been submitted to the Confederation Diplomatic Office at the New Geneva Embassy 14 months ago with all the required technical specifications and supporting documentation. The filing had been completed by Ambassador Patricia Wong, who specialized in bureaucratic procedures and had followed every regulation to the letter. The chamber fell completely silent except for the humming of the ship's power systems as the aliens stared at the official petition document floating before them. Chancellor Crix's mandibles stopped clicking while General Voss's crystal body went completely dark. Even the reporters seemed to sense that something significant was happening, though they did not yet understand what it meant. Admiral Thalorian's communications officer approached the table with obvious reluctance and whispered something urgent in his commander's ear. The young Zephyrian's voice carried clearly enough for everyone to hear as he confirmed that the Diplomatic Corps archives did indeed contain the human petition, exactly as Harrison had described. Chancellor Crix recovered first and demanded to know why the Council had never been informed about this reclassification request. His compound eyes glittered with anger as he realized that someone in the Confederation bureaucracy had failed to pass along critical information that could have prevented the entire war. Harrison maintained her diplomatic composure while internally celebrating the success of her strategy. She explained that according to Confederation law, reclassification petitions were automatically approved if no objections were filed within 6 standard months. The human petition had passed that threshold 7 months ago, which meant Earth was now legally classified as an established civilization. General Voss protested that the Council had never received any notification about the petition or its automatic approval. His crystal form flickered with distressed patterns as he tried to understand how such an important document could have been overlooked by the entire Confederation government. Carter helpfully projected the communication logs showing that approval notices had been transmitted to all Council member offices according to standard procedures. However, the messages had been classified as routine administrative updates rather than critical diplomatic changes, which meant they were probably buried in someone's inbox under hundreds of other bureaucratic notifications. The alien representatives began arguing among themselves in multiple languages as the full scope of their bureaucratic failure became clear. Harrison watched their growing panic with satisfaction while maintaining her professional demeanor. The silence that followed Harrison's revelation stretched for several heartbeats before chaos erupted among the Confederation representatives. Admiral Thalorian's scales darkened to almost black while Chancellor Crix's mandibles clicked in rapid patterns of distress. General Voss's crystal body flickered through a dozen different colors as he processed the magnitude of their mistake. The confident atmosphere that had filled the chamber just minutes earlier evaporated like morning mist under a blazing sun. Harrison remained seated calmly, while the aliens argued among themselves in their various languages. She could understand fragments of their heated discussions as they blamed different departments and officials for the communication failure that had led to this disaster. Carter sat beside her taking detailed notes while occasionally glancing at the increasingly agitated council members with barely hidden satisfaction. Admiral Thalorian finally restored order by pounding his fist on the crystalline table hard enough to make the holographic displays flicker. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across the galaxy, but Harrison could hear the uncertainty beneath his harsh words. He demanded to know how such a critical document could have been mishandled by the Confederation's supposedly efficient bureaucracy. Thumwar, young communications officer who had confirmed the petition's existence, stepped forward, again with another datapad in his trembling hands. He explained that the approval notice had been processed by bureaucrat Zilch in the administrative division and transmitted according to standard protocols. However, the message had been tagged as a routine update rather than an urgent diplomatic communication, which meant it was automatically sorted into the low-priority inbox that most council members ignored. Chancellor Crix's compound eyes bulged with rage as he learned that the fate of an entire war had been decided by a filing error in some distant office complex. He demanded to know why such an important reclassification had not been flagged for immediate council attention. His mandibles clicked so rapidly they sounded like machine gun fire in the otherwise quiet chamber. Carter activated his datapad and projected additional documentation that showed the complete paper trail of humanity's reclassification process. Every form had been filled out correctly and submitted to the proper offices within the specified time limits. The Confederation's own bureaucrats had processed the petition and approved it according to their established procedures. There was no question about the legitimacy of Earth's new legal status. General Voss struggled to find some flaw in the human documentation, but the crystal patterns in his body grew dimmer as he realized their position was hopeless. He pointed out that even if the reclassification was valid, humanity had still violated expansion protocols by building colonies without proper authorization. Surely that was enough to justify some kind of military response against the aggressive human species. Harrison shook her head politely and asked Carter to display the expansion notification forms that Earth had also filed with the appropriate Confederation offices. The holographic documents showed that humanity had submitted detailed reports about every new colony, including their locations, coordinates, and population projections. All the paperwork had been processed through the Subcommittee for Territorial Documentation in Filing Division 7R of Administrative Complex. Delta, the alien representatives, stared at the mountain of properly filed documents with growing horror as they realized that humanity had followed every single regulation and procedure required by Confederation law. Not only had Earth achieved legal reclassification as an established civilization, but they had also notified the proper authorities about their expansion activities exactly as the law required. Admiral Thalorian's communications officer whispered something else in his commander's ear that made the admiral's scales turn an even darker shade of blue. The young Zephyrian confirmed that all the human expansion notifications had been received and processed by the Territorial Documentation Office. The forms had been stamped approved and filed in the appropriate databases where they should have been accessible to anyone conducting a legal review before authorizing military action. Chancellor Crix demanded to know why the Military Planning Committee had not been informed about these critical documents before the war began. His voice rose to a harsh buzz as he realized that the entire Confederation military had acted on incomplete and outdated legal information. Thousands of ships and millions of personnel had been committed to a conflict that should never have been authorized. Harrison allowed herself a small smile as she watched the alien leaders grapple with the implications of their bureaucratic failure. She had spent years studying Confederation procedures and knew exactly how their complex filing systems worked. More importantly, she had known that most military commanders and political leaders rarely bothered to check the fine details of legal documentation before making important decisions. General Voss made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the disaster by arguing that the war had already been fought and could not be undone regardless of what the paperwork said. His crystal form pulsed with dim patterns as he suggested that they should proceed with the surrender ceremony and deal with the legal complications later through diplomatic channels. Carter immediately projected another set of legal documents that made the general's argument impossible to sustain. The Galactic Warfare Convention clearly stated that any military action taken against a legally recognized established civilization without proper authorization constituted an act of illegal aggression. The penalties for such violations included massive reparations and potential criminal charges against the commanding officers. The young aide read aloud from Article 9 of the Convention, which specified that civilizations subjected to illegal military action were entitled to territorial concessions, technology transfers, and monetary damages. He noted that the last case involving illegal warfare had resulted in reparations equivalent to 40% of the aggressor's gross planetary product for 50 years. Admiral Thalorian slumped in his command chair as the full weight of their situation became clear. The Confederation had not only lost a war they thought they had won, but they were now legally liable for massive compensation to the species they had attacked. His golden eyes dimmed as he contemplated explaining this disaster to the billions of beings who had celebrated humanity's supposed defeat. Chancellor Crix's mandibles stopped clicking entirely as he realized that his political career was probably over. The Hive Consortium would demand his resignation once they learned that he had supported an illegal war based on outdated information. General Voss's crystal body went completely dark as he faced the possibility of court-martial proceedings for his role in the unauthorized military action. Harrison finally spoke into the stunned silence that had fallen over the chamber. She told the assembled aliens that despite their legal victory, humanity was prepared to be reasonable about resolving this unfortunate situation. Her calm voice cut through their despair like a lifeline thrown to drowning sailors. Admiral Thalorian raised his head slowly as Harrison's words cut through the despair that had settled over the Confederation Council like a heavy blanket. His golden eyes met hers across the crystalline table, while the other alien representatives watched with desperate hope. The possibility of finding some reasonable solution to their catastrophic legal situation was the first good news they had heard since the human diplomat began dismantling their entire case. Harrison stood gracefully and walked around the table to stand before the holographic displays that still showed the damning evidence of the Confederation's bureaucratic failures. Her blue eyes reflected the swirling lights as she gestured toward the legal documents that had transformed their victory, celebration into a nightmare of potential reparations and criminal charges. She told the assembled aliens that while humanity was certainly entitled to pursue full legal remedies through the Galactic Court of Justice, they preferred to find a more constructive path forward. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who held all the winning cards, but was generous enough to offer her opponents a way to save face. Carter watched from his seat as his mentor demonstrated the diplomatic skills that had made her reputation across the galaxy. Chancellor Crix leaned forward with his compound eyes fixed on Harrison's face as she outlined humanity's proposed resolution to the crisis. His mandibles had stopped their nervous clicking and now hung motionless as he waited to hear what price the humans would demand for their silence about the Confederation's illegal war. Harrison explained that Earth was prepared to accept an immediate cessation of all hostilities along with full recognition of human territorial claims in the 17 star systems they had legally colonized. She emphasized that these were not conquests or seizures, but legitimate settlements that had been properly documented according to Confederation law. The alien representatives nodded reluctantly as they realized they had no choice but to accept these basic demands. General Voss asked in his crystalline voice what other terms humanity expected in exchange for not pursuing the matter through official legal channels. His faceted body flickered with nervous patterns as he imagined the massive reparations that a court might impose for 3 years of illegal warfare against an established civilization. Harrison smiled slightly and told him that Earth also wanted formal trade agreements that would give humanity preferred status in galactic commerce. This was hardly an unreasonable request since most established civilizations enjoyed such arrangements with their neighbors. The economic benefits would help rebuild the human colonies that had been damaged during the illegal military campaign. Carter activated his datapad and projected a preliminary trade agreement that he and Harrison had prepared during their journey to the alien flagship. The document outlined fair exchange rates for human goods and services along with access to Confederation shipping routes and commercial networks. The terms were generous but not exploitative, unlike the surrender documents that had started this entire confrontation. Admiral Thalorian studied the proposed agreement carefully while his legal advisors whispered urgently in his ears. He asked what other compensation humanity expected for the damage caused by 3 years of unauthorized warfare. His scales had returned to their normal blue color as he began to see a way out of the legal disaster that threatened to destroy his career and his empire. Harrison returned to her seat and folded her hands on the table as she outlined the final elements of her proposal. Humanity wanted access to certain Confederation technologies that would help accelerate their development as a galactic civilization. She emphasized that these were not military secrets but civilian innovations in areas like medicine, transportation, and communication that would benefit both species. Most importantly, she continued, humanity wanted a formal public acknowledgement that the conflict had arisen from administrative oversight rather than human aggression. This would clear Earth's reputation in the galactic community and prevent other civilizations from viewing humans as dangerous warmongers who needed to be contained through military force. Chancellor Crix calculated quickly in his insect brain and realized that Harrison's demands were remarkably moderate. Considering the strength of humanity's legal position, a hostile species might have demanded territory or tribute or even criminal prosecutions of the officers responsible for the illegal war. Instead, the humans were asking for basic recognition and commercial opportunities that any reasonable civilization would expect. General Voss asked quietly what would happen if the Council refused these terms and chose to face the consequences through official legal channels. His crystal form dimmed as he contemplated the alternative scenario, where human lawyers presented their case to neutral judges who would have no sympathy for bureaucratic excuses. Carter answered by projecting the relevant legal precedents from similar cases throughout galactic history. The last civilization that had been convicted of illegal warfare against an established species had been forced to pay reparations equal to 40% of their total economic output for 50 years. Their military had been disbanded and their government had been placed under international supervision until the debt was paid. Harrison emphasized that humanity had no desire to see the Confederation suffer such devastating punishment for what was essentially an honest mistake caused by poor communication between departments. Earth preferred to build positive relationships with their galactic neighbors rather than destroy them through legal warfare that would benefit no one except the court bureaucrats. Admiral Thalorian looked around the table at his fellow council members and saw resignation, mixed with relief in their alien faces. They had started this meeting expecting to dictate terms to a defeated enemy, and instead found themselves grateful for the mercy of a species they had tried to enslave. The reversal was complete and undeniable. The Admiral asked Harrison if she had the authority to finalize such an agreement on behalf of the human government. His voice carried a note of hope as he realized that this disaster might still be salvaged without destroying the Confederation's reputation or economy. Harrison nodded and told him that Earth's leaders had given her full authority to negotiate whatever settlement would best serve humanity's long-term interests. She had already transmitted the proposed terms to the human government and received their approval before entering the alien flagship. The only thing left was for the Confederation Council to accept the offer and begin implementing the new relationship between their civilizations. Carter prepared the formal documents while the alien representatives huddled together for a final consultation. When they emerged, Admiral Thalorian spoke for the entire council as he accepted humanity's generous terms and apologized for the bureaucratic failures that had caused such unnecessary suffering. The war was finally over, but now the humans had won it through words rather than weapons. 6 months later, Harrison stood in the newly opened human embassy on Confederation Central, watching as the first joint research vessel launched toward the distant stars where both species would explore together as equals.